What's going on, guys? Welcome to the David F. Haas podcast. I'm your host, David F. Haas. Thanks for taking the time to tune in today. I think this is a great podcast because it's talking about one of the most freeing awarenesses that I've ever come to. And once you make this realization, and once you truly believe it, so it's one thing for me here to tell you about this awareness, but it'll be another thing for you to truly understand it and feel it in your soul. But once you make this realization, it will completely transform your life. You'll come to the realization that before this awareness, you had been limiting your potential in so many areas, all because of this one simple little thing that is holding pretty much all of us back. And this awareness is simple, and the concept, again, is easy to kind of hear, but harder to implement. And it's essentially this, is that nobody gives a fuck about what it is that you do with your life. And I know that seems a little bit harsh, and it's like, oh, my mom really cares about what it is that I do. But I'm not saying that nobody gives a fuck about you. It's like nobody gives a fuck about what it is that you do. And the reason that they don't give a fuck about what it is that you do is because we're all focused on what it is that we are doing. And while we may do something great and get a few pats on the back, get some praise, we get lifted up momentarily, immediately those people go back to worrying about what it is that they need to do. In fact, our success may trigger them to look at their own life, start comparing their lives to ours, and they have pretty much immediately forgotten about what it is that we have done, and they're back to focusing on what they need to do to catch us potentially. The other thing is that you might do something wrong, and in that doing something wrong, you might get judged, or you might feel some sort of emotion. And while we have that temporary discomfort from that emotion, that judgment is just passing. And immediately after those people have placed that judgment on us, then they're going back into looking at their own lives. In fact, them placing judgment on us is just a way for them to push us down in order to lift themselves up. So again, it's about what's going on with that person, not what's going on with ourselves. And I can pretty much describe this in a better example. Is if I show you a picture of 10 people and you're one of the people in that picture of 10 people, where's the first place that your eyes go? It goes right to you, right? Because you only care about what it is that you look like in that picture. You're not really focused on anybody else. And while this concept is freeing, to come to this understanding that you can just do whatever it is that you truly want to do, I know a lot of you aren't going to change your life and start living this life of like, I only do what it is that I want to do. I'm being my true self. And the reason for that is this realization that people are only focused on themselves is not enough for us to get out of the fear of judgment or the fear of disappointing others, or actually putting ourselves out there to become uncomfortable. And the reason for that is because our ego is designed to protect us. Our ego, its primary function is to, make sure that we survive. And it does this in the physical world, so we don't walk in front of buses, and it was really important to have an ego back in the day when we were living a life of uncertainty. We were living lives in caves and, in tents and huts, and we were being chased by lions and these types of things. So we needed the ego to protect us and ensure our survival. But as we've moved now into a more, civilized society where the dangers aren't as robust as they once were, the ego is also going to work at protecting us from feeling emotional pain. And the tools that we create to avoid feeling emotional pain is what I refer to, and this is also a thing that Mastin Kipp coined, is a survival pattern. It's basically some sort of tool that we created to make sure that we never feel this emotional pain. And a big part of the emotional pain that we feel is related to the opinions of other people. So this is installed in us at a very young age. When you're a young little kid, you do something good and you get praise from your parents, and immediately you begin to identify your worth with your accomplishments. And so this may create the survival pattern of drive and desire, because we want to continue to feel that praise from our parents or from whoever it may be, in order to feel like we're worthy. And at the core of striving for accomplishment to feel worthy is the fact that we ultimately feel unworthy, and we feel that we need to add something out there in order to feel fully worthy. So as we look deeper into this, we can see that it's not by adding anything. It's not by adding more accomplishments, more money, better looks, being skinnier, whatever it is, that is going to alleviate the suffering that we are trapped in, right? And I'm doing this book right now. It's Mastin Kipp has this book called Claim Your Power. It's a really great book. It kind of like really walks you through what the survival patterns are that you created and how those are limiting you. And one of the lessons, I think it was like day 7 or something along those lines, he basically says like, how has the limiting behaviors, the survival patterns that you've created, affected your life? And so as I started like writing this, it was like I realized that pretty much everything that I've done in my life is out of fear, like fear of judgment from others, fear of conflict, the feeling of being powerless or weak. And in order to protect myself from feeling these types of emotions, I created all types of survival patterns. One of them was the people-pleasing behavior. So that people-pleasing behavior created this version of myself that was completely different from who I truly was, right? Who I truly was someone that was like fun, outgoing, personable, entertaining. When I was a kid, I was like kind of like the life of the party. Like I'd always be doing like little entertaining things for my parents' friends when they came over, and always getting laughs and everything along those lines. But then slowly over time, people started telling me that behavior was, inappropriate. And that made me feel like I was a disappointment to them, or that made me feel embarrassed. And immediately my ego went to work to make sure that I didn't feel that pain anymore, right? And that pain, the fear of feeling that pain is what has held me back for pretty much the better part of my life. And as you begin to realize this one little thing is that it's like no one really cares about what it is that you're doing, you can then start to be like, okay, if no one cares, then why do I care so much? And then you can start the process of learning how to become free of this pain for good. And so I know the question you're asking is, well, how do I become free of the pain? Well, step 1 is you got to bring awareness to it, right? You got to start becoming aware of what patterns you've created to protect yourself from feeling pain. So what are some common patterns? Overanalyzing, overthinking, self-doubt, perfectionism, people-pleasing, avoidance, escape. These are patterns that we create to not feel emotional pain. So how do you break free from those patterns? Well, after you create awareness around them, you can ask yourself the simple question is, what is it that I'm avoiding feeling, right? And when you do that, you will come to the realization that you're avoiding the feeling of being a disappointment. You're avoiding the feeling of being powerless. You're avoiding the feeling of being unworthy. And then you can ask yourself, well, where did this begin in my life? Because when you were born, you were like this perfect innocent being. You were like this perfect, sponge that was ready to absorb all this information. The problem being is that you absorbed all that information unconsciously, and the ego created tools to protect you from feeling discomfort. And when did you feel discomfort? Well, it could be from anything. We develop survival patterns to protect us from all kinds of things. So one of the things you might have developed a survival pattern for is not being accepted by classmates. So you weren't the popular kid. So right away, you recognize that nobody liked you. So maybe you then started becoming like the class clown to try and get more attention. And so that's how you've always avoided feeling like you're not accepted by, being goofy all the time, which has led to you not being serious enough in certain situations in your life, which has led to missed out opportunities in your life today. Okay. For me, it was pretty much the reverse. I was this outgoing kid, fun loving, and then slowly I started becoming more and more and more reserved, more and more serious, because I felt that if I was my true self, people weren't going to accept me. People weren't going to like me. And that has led to this life of not living up to who I truly am, not being connected to who I am at a higher level. So we have two selves. We have the small self with a small s, and then we have our higher self with a capital S. This higher self is our soul, our essence, our consciousness, whatever it is that how you want to describe it. And the further The more survival patterns that we take on, the more feelings that we're avoiding feeling, the less connected we are with our true self. And it takes, even this could be the catalyst, listening to this podcast to realize that you are not being true to yourself. And this is also like a level of integrity, acting like you're somebody that you're not is essentially lying to yourself every single day. And when you realize that you're lying to yourself, you immediately want to begin to stop that. And you can start to lean into this by leaning into who it was that you were when you were a kid, right? And so when I stopped drinking alcohol, actually it was 11 years ago that I stopped drinking alcohol, I had to learn how to be the person I was when I was drinking alcohol without the use of alcohol. Because what alcohol did for me was it dropped all the survival patterns, right? It laid down all those blocks to feeling joy, right? It brought back my confidence, my natural confidence that I had as a child, right? It brought back my goofiness, my funniness. It brought back my charisma, my ability to talk to anybody. It brought all that back, but it was with the use of a substance, right? It also brought back like dancing and these types of things. So as I began to, after I quit alcohol, I started realizing that, okay, how do I get back to drunk Dave without being drunk, essentially, right? And so then I started just kind of leaning into who I was as a kid. And that was like outgoing, that was loving. And I started bringing more of that in. And as I did, I became uncomfortable, right? I remember I think it was just 2 years ago, I finally danced at a wedding, right? Haven't danced in 10 years because of the only time I ever danced was when I was drinking alcohol. So finally I started dancing again. And I remember now it's kind of coming full circle as I'm, on the podcast here. Is I remember when I was a kid, I was at my uncle's wedding, and I was like the life of the party. And I was stone sober, of course, because I was like 9 years old. But I was at like the life of the party because I was out on the dance floor doing all these dance moves. I didn't give a fuck about what anyone thought about me, right? So it's this constant fear of what people are going to think that holds us back from being our best version of ourselves. So the question that I would like to ask you today, and you can take a second, obviously if you're driving you're not going to be able to do this, but you can take a second to ask yourself is like, how is my fear of being judged, being a disappointment, how has that prevented me from living my best life? And then you can go through certain areas in your life. You can go through relationships, you can go through finances, you can go through your career, or you can go through what else can you go through, your emotional state, your mental health. You can go through all of these areas in your life, and you can ask yourself, how has this fear of being my true self or not being my true self prevented me from maximizing my potential? And then the next question I would ask yourself is, what has the world been missing because you are not being your true self, right? And when I did this is an exercise, I'm paraphrasing this exercise from that book, Claim Your Power, which I highly suggest. And what I wrote was that the world was missing love, right? And I was like, that's an interesting answer. And the thing that's interesting about coaching or about doing books like this is that you just connect to what's in the highest good. And the reason that happens is because we're beginning to break down these walls of who we think we are, right? And who we think we are is the programs that we've taken on. And those programs we begin to identify as those programs. So one of the programs that I took on was that I was an entrepreneur, right? And I identified as an entrepreneur. So anytime someone thinks about David Haas, they think, oh yeah, he's a good businessman, he runs all these businesses, he's successful, whatever. And that became my identity. But after learning to break down these survival patterns, I realized that the only reason I ever became an entrepreneur was to not feel the shame of kind of not having things when I was a kid, right? So then when I dropped that persona that I had created, I got connected to what it was I truly wanted to do, which was to help people, right? And this was the birth of my coaching business. Now, while that entrepreneurial drive has, everything you can see is happening in perfect synchronicity, because my entrepreneurial ability is what has helped this coaching business grow. So I'm not looking back with regret, but I am recognizing that I began to identify as the programs that I took on. And the more I went through my life without that awareness, the less I was connected to my true self. So now as I begin to unprogram, and that's essentially what spiritual growth is about unprogramming. It's like you were born, you were like this perfect innocent being, and you slowly took on programs that moved you further and further away from your true self. So today is your kind of awareness, your calling, that nobody gives a fuck about what it is that you do, right? So stop living your life to please other people. Stop living your life worried about what other people are going to think about you if you go down this path, right? It's like both my wife and I, like, we have very unorthodox careers. Like, I've been an entrepreneur, since I was 16. She's a tattoo artist, and pretty much every single person that we know, tried to steer us in a different direction. And if we would have listened to them, I'd probably be working at Chrysler right now. Not that there's anything wrong with working at Chrysler, but it wouldn't have been my passion, right? And my wife would have been working at Empire Roofing, which was where she went out of university, and she hated every second of it, right? So it's like we would have been doing things that we didn't truly want to do because we weren't connected to who we truly are. But as we began to unprogram, we began to like stop caring so much about what we're supposed to be doing, because this is what society tells us. Then we got to align with our purpose, and then everything became easy and effortless. And while I'm still working crazy hours, and I just opened up this retreat, and I was just talking to my team about how I have zero time. It's like, while I'm still doing that, I don't really feel like I'm working hard, because this is the things that I want to be doing. So it doesn't feel like hard work. It is still just flowing. And this is the power that comes from when we connect to our higher self. The other thing that happens is that our higher self is connected to God, to the universe, to whatever it is. And when you connect to that, you get the support from that power. So this is the reason why my coaching business grew relatively rapidly, because it was like I was connected to what my soul wanted. My soul's connected to what is in the highest good for all. And so then because of that, I'm just getting support. Whereas before, as an entrepreneur, I was just connected to what I thought society wanted from me, which was to make a bunch of money based on the ego programs that I had created. And that level of desire, which calibrates on the scale of consciousness at 125, there's no power in it. And because of that, you're not getting any support from this infinite intelligence, essentially. So this is the power that comes from learning to be your true self. And this is the power that comes from when we drop the fear of what other people are going to think of us. It's like, it's really fucked up to think that we're living our lives for other people when everyone is just living their lives for themselves. Right? So I think I'll leave the podcast at that, and to leave you with that question is like, who would you be if you weren't worried about what everyone thought about you, or if you weren't worried about being a disappointment, if you weren't worried about or feared the judgment of the people around you? Like, what would you be doing, right? And then just take the opportunity today and just to start taking some steps in that direction, and feel the uncomfortability as you do that. And then you can ask yourself, can I handle this? Can I handle this feeling of anxiousness, uneasiness, of judgment, of fear? And if the answer is yes, then you can move right through it by allowing yourself to feel it fully. And then you'll be on the path to connecting to your definite purpose. And once you do that, life becomes easy and effortless. So thanks for taking the time to listen. Make sure you join me again next Wednesday.